Welcome back to The Explainer. I'm so incredibly excited to get into this one today because we are unpacking a truly fascinating and honestly pretty brutal historical turning point from the year 1518. We're pulling directly from the historical sources to map out a sequence of events that literally sounds like a Hollywood script, but is entirely grounded in the geopolitical reality of the 16th century Mediterranean. We're going to look at grief, incredible arrogance, the overwhelming force of nature, and how one man's vengeance completely flipped the balance of power between empires. So let's dive right in and look at the exact catalyst for this entire conflict.
Our story starts with a massive, devastating loss. According to the source texts, in 1518, the famous commander Arouge Barbarossa met a gruesome end in Tlemcen at the hands of the Spanish. But the texts make it clear that this wasn't just your standard battlefield casualty. The sources detail how the Spanish forces tore his body to pieces, beheaded him, and literally took his head on a celebratory tour across Catholic Europe. And what's really striking here is the sheer scale of the reaction. I mean, the texts record that church bells were ringing out across European cities just to celebrate his death. To them, Arouge was a complete nightmare who had caused them deep humiliation, and they firmly believed his death meant the end of their troubles. They paraded this victory to the masses. But, as we're about to see, they severely miscalculated what would happen next.
And that brings us to the core question we're exploring today. How on earth did Arouge's brother, Herod Barbarossa, turn this moment of absolute crushing defeat and profound personal grief into the Spanish Empire's greatest loss? Think about it. You have a man who has just lost his brother in the most degrading public way imaginable. His forces are totally depleted. His enemies are literally ringing bells in celebration. By all conventional logic, this really should be the end of the Barbarossa story. Instead, it's the spark for an epic geopolitical shift.
Section 1. The War of Letters. Look at the sheer confidence and honestly the underlying panic of the Spanish leadership here. Right after Arouge's death, this was the exact advice given to the Spanish king, as recorded in our sources. Thank God we are relieved of the greater evil. Now we must quickly get rid of the lesser evil before the snake turns into a dragon. The lesser evil they're talking about is Herod. They totally recognized that while his brother was dead, Herod was still a threat. He was a snake that needed to be crushed right then and there while he was vulnerable, before he could grow in power and become a full-blown dragon. This completely sets the stage for the incredibly aggressive posture Spain is about to take.
So, running with that advice, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, writes directly to Herod with this unbelievably arrogant ultimatum. Charles says, "Your brother's dead. Your wing is broken. Who do you think you are to stand against the most powerful Christian king?" He commands Herod to take his ships and men and leave Algiers immediately, warning him to never step foot in Africa again. And the source text notes that Charles didn't even stop there. He explicitly threatened Herod by reminding him that the Spanish had already killed his two brothers, Elias and Arouge, and promised Herod the exact same fate if he dared to resist. It's the ultimate show of dominance, weaponizing Herod's fresh grief right against him.
But how do you respond when the most powerful emperor in the world threatens you with your murdered brothers? Well, you do this. This is Herod's actual recorded response, and it is just chilling. Tomorrow, and tomorrow is not far off, you will see your soldiers' bodies blown apart, your ships sink, and your commanders return to you crowned with the shame of defeat. Notice how there is absolutely zero hesitation here. No negotiation, no surrender, just a definitive, brutal prophecy. This specific exchange of letters is crucial because it locked both sides onto a collision course. There was zero backing down after this. The war of wars was over. The physical war was inevitable.
Which brings us to Section 2, Visualizing the Goliath.
Now, when Charles V got Herod's defiant reply, he didn't just send out a local militia. According to the text, he called upon a massive European coalition. We are talking about forces contributed by the kings of Naples, Sicily, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and of course Spain itself. All of this was placed under the command of his admiral, Hugo de Moncada. They sailed out, anchored off the coast of Algiers, and even joined up with another huge Crusader army in Bejaia before landing in an organized, highly disciplined formation. This is the very definition of overwhelming force.
And this perfectly illustrates the stark, honestly almost absurd imbalance of power here. On one side, you have Admiral Hugo de Moncada, backed by the combined military might of half of Europe. On the other side, the historical texts explicitly state that Herod Barbarossa marched out to face them, followed by only a, quote, few men. It is the ultimate David versus Goliath dynamic. These European forces are marching toward Algiers, fully expecting a walkover. They are expecting to just squash this snake exactly as they planned.
All right, Section 3, the climax and the storm.
Let's walk through this timeline from our sources because it moves insanely fast. Day 1. The massive European coalition anchors and confidently unloads their forces. Day 2. Despite having only a few men, Haydarden completely routs the invading army. The text describes a panic so severe that the European soldiers fled back toward their ships in absolute terror. The commanding admiral, Hugo de Moncada, was forced to literally hide among the corpses of his own men just to survive the massacre. Day 3. As if the military defeat wasn't enough, a massive, devastating sea storm rolls in and completely obliterates the anchored Spanish fleet. Day 4. The geopolitical reality has completely flipped upside down. With their massive fleet sitting at the bottom of the sea, the entire Spanish Mediterranean coast is suddenly left totally exposed and defenseless against Haydarden's ships. In literally a matter of days, the lesser evil they tried to crush became the undisputed master of the sea.
Moving into Section 4, a brutal aftermath. This is where we see the real, dark, historical consequence of weaponizing a rival's grief. So, following this catastrophic defeat, Emperor Charles V realized that a bunch of his high-ranking officers were now prisoners in Algiers. Now, standard procedure at the time was to pay ransoms. The sources state that the emperor offered huge sums of money to buy back his officers, but Haydarden flat-out refused. Driven by that deep-seated anger and grief over his brother Arouge's mutilation, Haydarden chose execution over wealth. He had all the captured officers killed. He wasn't acting as a politician looking to fill up a treasury, he was acting as a grieving brother out for pure vengeance.
The sources detail that Charles V, who is desperate at this point, then offered another massive fortune just to retrieve the bodies of his dead commanders. And here is where Haydarden's vengeance becomes absolute. Instead of taking the gold, he ordered the corpses to be thrown directly into the sea. He sent back this incredibly haunting message: if the families of these dead came to Algiers, they would not even find a place where their fathers and brothers were buried, nor even their ashes. They would find nothing but the waves of the Sea of Algiers to receive them. It's just a chillingly final statement. He denied his enemies the very closure that they had denied him when they paraded his brother's head across Europe.
So, here's the crucial question we are left with. When grief meets geopolitical power, how does the cycle of vengeance reshape the map of history? Charles V and his advisors really thought they were playing a straightforward game of military strategy. They thought taunting a broken man would secure their dominance. But instead, they unleashed a storm, both literal and figurative, that completely decimated their fleet, left their homelands defenseless, and created the exact dragon they were so afraid of. It really forces us to ask, how often do empires engineer their own downfall simply by underestimating the sheer force of human emotion? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Take some time to think on that one, and I'll catch you next time.